Welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast, where we're working to help you call a truce with your anxiety. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here's your host, Elizabeth Cush, LCPC.
This week's episode is sponsored by Progression Counseling, providing Maryland residents with individual, group, and online counseling for the overstressed, overwhelmed, and overanxious. Find out more at progressioncounseling.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Woman Worriers podcast. Today, my guest is Sharon Martin. She is a licensed psychotherapist and a licensed clinical social worker, a mental health writer, and a media contributor on emotional health and relationships. Her psychotherapy practice in San Jose, California, specializes in helping perfectionists and people pleasers embrace their imperfections and overcome self-doubt and shame. Her own struggle to feel good enough inspired her passion for helping others learn to accept and love themselves. Sharon writes the popular blog Happily Imperfect for PsychCentral.com and is the author of the CBT workbook for perfectionism. And today we're going to talk about her workbook. We're going to talk about perfectionism, how it impacts or increases your anxiety, and some strategies that might help you overcome some of those perfectionist behaviors. So let's get started. This week's episode is sponsored by Progression Counseling, providing Maryland residents with individual, group, and online counseling for the overstressed, overwhelmed, and overanxious. Find out more at progressioncounseling.com. Hi, Sharon. Thanks so much for coming back and being on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to talk about your new book, the CBT workbook for perfectionism. But before we jump into that, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and kind of what inspired you to write this book in the first place.
Sure. Well, I'm a psychotherapist. I practice in San Jose, California, and I've been in practice for quite a long time. And I would say that part of what inspired me to write this book is, well, partly my own struggle with perfectionism, and then also just seeing how many of my clients struggle with perfectionism. And I would say often they didn't necessarily even use that word or really put it in that context, but that they were really struggling with feeling overwhelmed, stressed, highly pressured to succeed and do everything, I would say. I think this is common probably in a lot of places in the country, but here in Silicon Valley, it's a very fast-paced life. There are a lot of very successful companies and people, and I see this in adults, and I also see it in teenagers. I don't see as many teenagers in my practice anymore, but when I was definitely seeing a lot of it come up for high school kids around school and expectations in college, and just this overwhelming pressure to succeed and I think achieve at really, astronomical levels. That was, I feel like beyond what I felt as a teenager. And I certainly remember feeling highly stressed. And again, this is partly my own, struggle with the perfectionism coming in there, So I remember as a student, it feeling really important to do things well and get A's and do all of the homework and stay on top of everything, and it being a lot. But like I said, I feel like we have added on another level for kids today. So I was definitely seeing a lot of that coming up for people, and that they don't really know what to do with it, that they feel like they're kind of like caught in this, almost sort of hamster wheel of it, that, you have to just go and do and perform and perfect and achieve more. And there was no way out is what it ended up feeling like for folks. So in writing this book, I'm hoping that this provides some strategies and, some skills that people can build on so that they can learn how to, I would say, slow down and somewhat kind of reevaluate what's really important to them.
Yeah.
And learn how to be kinder to themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean not having high standards for themselves, because I think people who are perfectionists are always going to have high standards, but understanding that there's room for other things in our life too that are important, things
Absolutely.
like rest and fun and relaxation.
Yeah.
Right. To sort of create some balance for ourselves. And that can really improve the quality of people's lives.
So much. And it's interesting. I read an article recently that talked about millennials in particular in terms of somehow the good things have become bad and bad things have become good. So working 80-hour weeks is good, and taking off time to take care of yourself has become a bad thing. And so just ending up with, I think the article was focused on burnout and just creating this cycle of just going and never taking care of yourself is leading to all these people just, it described this one guy just not getting out of bed one day and going, you know what? I don't really care. I'm not going back to my job. And it was a huge, big pressure job, but he just got to that point. But
right. Yeah. I think that sort of speaks to it feeling like it's all or nothing, right? I have to do it all rather than how can I do some of it, of the work and some of the fun and the self-care.
Exactly.
And make room for all of it. Yeah, it's almost like sometimes that, 80-hour work week becomes the badge of honor, right? When you hear people bragging about how much they're working or...
Yeah, just being always on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or different accomplishments, that they've achieved or the place that they work or the title. Yeah, it can, I think in some ways it really is us getting out of alignment with our priorities and our values for some of us anyway.
Sure. So if you, this may not be a simple cut and dry definition, but for, you said that some of your clients don't recognize that it's kind of a perfectionism thing that's keeping them either working too much or not wanting even to approach the work if they can't do it perfectly. Mm-hmm. So how would you, for someone who may not, or maybe want to better understand what perfectionism looks like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so that's a good question because I think there's almost two parts of it. There are the observable signs of perfectionism, and I think this is what we're most used to identifying as the perfectionist. We kind of have an idea in our mind of somebody who, their appearance is very, perfected. They're very well groomed, very fashionable. They look just right. They keep themselves looking great, and, their house is immaculate and everything's in order and they're organized, and their kids behave themselves. And
from the outside, it looks perfect.
They work a lot. They've achieved a lot. They've been to, college and gotten degrees and awards. And there's lots of external signs of accomplishments and achievements. And so that's part of it. That's sort of, almost sort of the sort of type A personality, very driven and goal-oriented. And then there's almost, another group of perfectionists who don't really identify with that because, they might say, well, my house is really messy. How could I be a perfectionist, right? I'm obviously not keeping things up, and I don't demand that the house is immaculate or that my hair has to be done before I go out. Mm-hmm. But the perfectionism is really showing up in their thinking. It's more of a mindset that's holding them back. And sometimes this can be in procrastination, right? That they don't do things because they can't do them well, or they perceive that they can't do them well. And
or
that there's...
I was going to say, or the expectation, they think the expectation is they have to be able to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's the fear that they won't be able to live up to that expectation, which is either your own internal expectation or one that somebody else has placed there. So there's a mindset of, well, if I can't do it perfectly, if I can't do it better than average, I'm just not going to do it. Like, what's the point? Or sometimes it's even if a feeling of less than, I'm not good enough, because if I was, this would be easy for me. So it's almost like, because this is hard, I have to put so much effort into doing this, that must mean I'm not very smart, or, fill in the blank with whichever adjective, you're feeling crummy about yourself.
Yeah.
In that situation, which again, it's the mindset is I have set this unrealistically high expectation for myself that there was no way for me to achieve. And that's really sort of the crux of the perfectionism is when you have these expectations that are so high that you can't achieve them.
Right.
And then that shows up, in your behavior and in your thinking. And so, like in this example, it's not necessarily observable to other people that you're procrastinating, or maybe even that you're just not trying new things. Like maybe you're missing out on new opportunities. You don't try something new. If, maybe your friend invites you to do karaoke and you're like, you just don't go because you're afraid of embarrassing yourself, that you're not going to do it well. You're not going to do a good job. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to apply for a new job that you're interested in, again, because that fear is holding you back. There's a feeling of, well, I'm just putting myself out there, and I'll be rejected, or I'll be told I'm not good enough, so I'll just play it safe. And again, this is not something that you can observe in somebody else. It's just something that internally, if you take the time to think about, am I really limiting myself? Am I holding myself back because I'm afraid of not succeeding?
Yeah, not doing it 110%. Yeah.
Right. As if, we know that, most of us apply for jobs that we don't get. Right. So for the perfectionist, like, that feels very painful. I don't want to put myself in that situation of being told something negative about myself. Or again, that's my interpretation, is there must be something wrong with me because I didn't get the job. Versus there's so many other explanations about why you didn't get the job, right? Maybe they decided to give it to their sister-in-law because she lost her job. Right. It had nothing to do with whether you were smart enough or a good enough candidate for the job. But that's the mindset that we have. So we start seeing the world through that lens. And like I said, it really holds you back from trying new things. And because when you try new things, there are going to be places where you do not succeed.
Right.
You don't get every job that you apply for. And, hopefully we want to feel like it's okay to take those chances, and it's okay to not get the job or whatever. And we can still feel good about ourselves regardless. And that doesn't have to become like a defining moment of unworthiness for us.
Yeah. And so how do these seeds of perfectionism, get planted, and how do they grow? And like, what have you seen in your practice where, and yourself, you describe yourself as a recovering or whatever perfectionist. How do these things get planted in us?
Well, there's a number of different ways, and like most things, there are those roots that come from childhood, from the way that we were raised.
Yeah.
So it's often helpful to think about what you were taught, either overtly or covertly, that the messages were that you got as a child about achievements and self-worth, and failure and criticism and mistakes and those kinds of things. So sometimes it's as clear cut as, you had a parent who was a perfectionist, and you saw this and it was modeled for you that there wasn't tolerance for mistakes, and that you had to achieve that, A+ in every class and be the star athlete. And, you were taught that that's what was important from an early age. And I think going along with that, sometimes there's another group of parents that in the book I call demanding parents, which are similar, but the difference with the demanding parents is it's as if the parent themselves are deriving their self-worth from the child's achievements. So they're pushing on their child to achieve so much because it's going to reflect poorly on them if their child doesn't have all this outward success. So you may have had that experience as a kid too, where you've got a parent who's just really pushing you and telling you have to get the grades, you have to go to the Ivy League college, you have to become a doctor, whatever they viewed as successful. And then another family dynamic that sometimes can breed this perfectionism is when you have parents who were distracted or a very chaotic family environment that's, maybe we just sort of call it dysfunctional for simplicity's sake here. Yeah. But where kids are sort of lost in the shuffle, that they're not getting a lot of attention paid to them and they're not getting their emotional needs recognized and met. And so the perfectionism can become a way of trying to feel in control of that sort of out of control, chaotic, dysfunctional family. And it also can be a way of getting positive attention or just attention at all. So by being so good, again, sort of getting those awards or being recognized is a way for that kid to finally feel like they matter. Right. They're finally going to get their parents' attention.
Or even just that external reward takes the place of maybe the parental, like, okay, well, I'm not getting it at home. I mean, this may not even be a conscious decision, choice, but like there is recognition from somebody that I'm doing this. And so if I can get good grades, at least I know I can place value on my worth that way versus... Right.
Yeah. It could be, you're getting a teacher or a coach, right, or some other important adult to validate who you are, right, that you matter, which is, just a core need that we all have as children and as adults. We want to know that we matter in the world and to our parents in particular. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that, of course, it all, works together is just our culture, at large, right? And your particular culture of more specifically, right? So you might also think about, your religious upbringing, beliefs, just other cultural beliefs. Often there are some gender differences that come into play for people in terms of what's expected of girls versus boys. Sure. I think men and boys are certainly affected by perfectionism, but sometimes it can be a little bit different. I often hear from women that they felt as girls growing up that they had a lot of, there was a lot of pressure for them to be good girls and to be, sort of people pleasers who were self-sacrificing and doing things for other people. And that sort of feeds itself right into that perfectionism, which is, I've got to be good. And that's the path to, again, that self-worth and the attention.
Yeah. Well, and too, I think girls, and tell me if you find this too in your practice, that, girls and women, that yes, you need to be good at school, but you have to look good too. And you have to, be able to, once you're living on your own, take care of your home and maybe your children too, and do it all perfectly. Which is and really again, hard.
I think it's not just do it perfectly, but make it look easy while you're doing it. I think is often the message is, this isn't so hard. Yeah. You should be able to do it all. What's wrong with you if you can't? Yeah. Yeah, so I think, again, for women, we have, historically had that challenge of how do you do the career and the parenting and the family pieces all together at the same time. And again, men and boys absolutely get difficult messages about their appearance and what they should be looking like as well. So I don't mean to discount that. They're just different than the messages that girls get and women get about their bodies and their appearance. And, we are bombarded, I think, with images and messages about our appearance, and that is a big piece of perfectionism for a lot of women.
Yeah.
And a big piece of feeling bad about themselves is that they can't attain what they what they feel like they've been told is the ideal body.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Right.
Yes. Well, and social media plays so much into that. I mean, as well as just commercials and everything you see on television.
Right. So it's not fair for us to still hold ourselves to that standard of things that we're seeing in the media.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to say I love at the very beginning in the introduction of your book, you say, allow imperfection, because as a perfectionist, you may want to be doing the exercises in the book just right. And I'm going to read a little bit from your book. You said there are no grades or judgments. Instead, this is your opportunity to embrace your imperfections and learn to recognize them as a natural part of the human experience, not as shortcomings. And I just love that you integrate that right from the start, because I think that's I have seen that in therapy, clients wanting to be the perfect client, give me the assignment and I'm going to do it and tell me what I should be doing next. And it's just about learning really about yourself. And that just takes practice and coming back and talking and being insightful. And there isn't this perfect way to do it. Again, with the workbook, same thing. Like you're just going to do it and make mistakes along the way. And that's okay.
Yeah, the workbook, of course, gives you a plan. It gives you a map of some steps to take, but of course, everybody is different. Mm-hmm. And so it's perfectly fine, to jump around and spend more time on some sections than others. And I think naturally some of the exercises will speak more to other people. And again, even just if you think about, a group of perfectionists, like I said, I mean, it sort of manifests itself in different ways for different people, which means, as much as I'd like this to be the solution for everybody, you're going to pick and choose, I think.
Yeah. What to take out and what to work on.
And like you were saying, part of it is just allowing yourself to do what feels right for you, and that there isn't a right way to go about making changes or thinking about things differently or understanding yourself. At the end of the day, we're all figuring it out for ourselves, again, with some guidance from other people. But we have to, I think, honor, the differences amongst ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And how do you see, you talk about how perfectionism can add to stress levels, and we've talked a little bit about that, but what do you see links between perfectionism, stress, and anxiety?
Yeah, well, like we were talking, I think the perfectionism really, it adds another layer of stress, I think, to an already stressful life that most of us are living. Mm-hmm. Because, when you think about, you're just adding all this pressure to do more, and you're adding pressure to, sometimes that means actually doing more work, because you might actually feel like you need to redo work in order to make it perfect. So sometimes that's like literally you have created extra work for yourself. Or I think with the procrastination, we all know that doesn't really solve our problem. Usually it just makes us feel more stressed and anxious because we know we should be doing whatever task we're trying to avoid. So we're not actually, kicking back and relaxing and forgetting about it. It's in the back of our minds. We're stressing about it and worrying about it.
Or giving ourselves a hard time about it, that we're not doing it.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of the mental energy gets spent, right? That stress is on all the self-critical thoughts that we're thinking, all of the mean things that we're saying to ourselves.
Yeah.
And yes, that's an element of stress, but it also just exacerbates the problem because we already feel bad about ourselves. And now we're just reiterating, you're a failure, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're never going to get this right. Whatever that voice sounds like for you, And that doesn't motivate anybody to do better.
No.
Right? That just makes you feel more stressed and more anxious, more out of control, inferior, hopeless.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Just reinforcing all these things. Yeah. These horribly negative things about yourself, which then you're like, well, why would I even start if I can't even get this part right?
Right.
Yeah.
It becomes that, self-defeating, idea, self-defeating thought, because you've already, are thinking, oh, I'm not going to be successful at this, saying that to yourself, and you believe it. And then set this really high standard for yourself that you can't possibly meet. So, of course, you're not going to meet it. And then you feel like, well, that just proves my point. I really am stupid because I didn't get that job.
Well, and I love that you included working on self-compassion, working on forgiveness and mindfulness among your, towards the end of the book, some of the exercises working on taking care of yourself around your imperfections. And that's such a nice, I feel like some CBT stuff doesn't take that into account. It's just like, change your thoughts and you're going to feel better, change your thoughts, change your behaviors. And it's like, okay, but if we're still feeling terrible about ourselves, like we need to work on that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand nicely because the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy piece of it, really helps you look at where your thoughts have gotten off track, right?
Yep.
Where you're setting those really high expectations that you can't meet, where you're saying things to yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Having unrealistic expectations of yourself. Then, right, when we can bring in this other part, which is, this is hard. This is, hard for everybody to struggle with these things. Wouldn't it be nice if we could be kind to ourselves and love ourselves despite the fact that we're having a hard time, because we're having a hard time, because we're disappointed, because we're, not feeling like we're achieving as much as we want to, because we feel like we're imperfect and we're making mistakes, right? So part of that self-compassion is actually remembering that other people are struggling, with exact same things. It's not just you. And I think it's almost sort of isolating. You're sort of in that little perfectionism bubble, just feeling like I must be the only one who's not getting this, who's not able to do it all. Versus sort of broadening, your thoughts to really saying, okay, it's not something inherently inferior or wrong with me. Again, and this is where we do ourselves as a community a disservice by not talking about how hard things are, or being more authentic about what real life looks like for us. Because when we have those authentic conversations with our friends or our family, then we do realize, oh yeah, like you're having a hard time, managing work and, your kid's schedule. Oh, okay. I guess, it's not just me. It's not that I'm just feeling like a failure as a mother.
Right.
Maybe instead I can see this as more of a, universal experience. And then I can give myself some comfort for that.
Yeah.
Right. And I can give myself some compassion, just like we would for our friends when they're saying, if your friend tells you she's feeling like a failure as a mother, you're going to say something nice to her.
Right. You're not going to go, yep, you are. You suck as a mom.
Right. What's wrong with that you can't, do everything and make it look easy and breeze through all of this. Right. So we can see ourselves in that same experience. Then we can say, okay, you deserve some love, some kindness, some self-care, because those are the things that are actually going to help us feel good about ourselves, and not so judgmental and so inadequate. And again, I think it's just just be more realistic about what's possible.
Well, you mentioned in the book, like any new behaviors, anything we want to change, things we want to do differently, it takes time. And this isn't like the workbook isn't intended to be like a quick fix. When you're done this book, you're going to be cured of perfectionism. Talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what's the intention of the book in terms of working on it?
I'm sure I wrote something like that because I absolutely believe it. And I say it to my clients all the time, right? I mean, if you have had this pattern of behavior and pattern of thinking, since you were a child, I mean, you're not going to undo it in, a matter of weeks or even months, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot to be said for even just some incremental change. Mm. And I actually talk about this in the book as well, is, we can also think about what are the positive things about your perfectionism.
Yeah.
It's not all bad, right? It's bad at the extreme, but there are some good pieces to it. And we don't necessarily want to just throw out being organized or being
conscientious, right?
Yes,
right.
Being attentive to detail. Like, those are really good qualities. And I think often what we're really talking about is how can we just moderate the perfectionism? Like, how can we just dial it back enough so that you can enjoy the benefits of some of those personality traits and some of those habits that you've created, but not have it be at this extreme where you're stressed out all the time and you're feeling crappy about yourself all the time, right? So if we could find that place in the middle, then we'd be in a good spot. And so, again, I think this just fits in really nicely with the whole theme of the book, which is like, we need to get away from this all or nothing thinking, right? Is we are looking for some place in the middle that's going to work for us. Mm-hmm. Right. So you don't have to, learn every skill in the book and be able to do it, standing on your head. You just need to start catching, some of the negative thoughts that you're having, being able to catch the unrealistic expectations and change them at least some of the time. You don't necessarily have to learn how to do it all of the time, because that may be unrealistic.
Right. You don't want to be perfect at being imperfect, right?
Yeah, I mean, the point is just, I think oftentimes people can get a significant amount of improvement in the quality of their life from actually a fairly moderate amount of change.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Agree.
Like, sometimes you think, I just got to overhaul every single, thing in my life. And often that's not necessary.
Yeah. A little awareness goes a long way.
Because then again, it feels so overwhelming and daunting to feel like I have so much to do. Then I'm probably not going to even do it because I've already, it already feels like it's unattainable.
Right.
So break it off into little chunks. That's also a really good strategy, is one step at a time.
Yes, I agree with that. Do you have any tips for clients or for the audience? And how do people find the book?
Okay. Well, yes, I have lots of tips in the book.
Yes, you do. The book is filled with tips. So yes.
There are lots of tips.
Yes.
But yeah, we talked about a few of them. I will say one other tip maybe, or idea that is probably one of my favorites in the book. Mm-hmm. And again, it's maybe not radically different than some of the things that we've already talked about, but in the book I call it looking for partial successes. And again, this is a way of trying to break down that all or nothing thinking, either seeing something as a success or a failure, or it's good or it's bad, or it's right or it's wrong. So instead of just trying to decide if something was a success or a failure, oftentimes we end up putting things that were somewhat successful, or we did some of them, into the failure basket, which is unnecessary. An alternate way of looking at it is to say this was a partial success. And when you can think about things like this, I think you're really motivating yourself. You are choosing to look at the positive and acknowledge, what you did do instead of everything you didn't do.
Right.
Right. There's no reason I shouldn't get credit for, partial work.
Right. Well, and I think part of the problem that comes with not giving yourself any credit or saying this was a failure is then you're like, well, I just can't do it then, right? Like you're like, you just give up on it versus like, well, I went there once and good for me for getting there one time. You're
being overly hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. Which it's not fair. I mean,
it's not fair.
You're discounting, a positive step, a positive action that you took instead of, choosing to see that you did something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of, rewiring your thinking.
Well, and I think that can be so beneficial because we really do tend to lean toward the negative, right? We tend to remember the bad parts. And so highlighting, okay, well, I did go to the gym that one time or whatever.
So, I would say if people aren't sure, if you're skeptical, give it a try and see how it is, right? It'll feel weird at first, just like any change. I think especially if you've been very self-critical, anything that you do that feels kind, feels weird, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's different.
Yeah. And it takes getting used to like doing anything that's different.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right.
So anyway, that's my last tip. The book is, it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you shop for books, you should be able to find it.
Perfect. Well, Sharon, thanks so much for taking the time today and talking to us about your book and giving us a little window into what it's like to be a perfectionist and how we can change that.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Sharon about her new book, the CBT Workbook for Perfectionism. I think that perfectionism can really cause a lot of stress and anxiety and leave you feeling overwhelmed, overworked, and burnt out. And her book has some really great practical strategies broken down into easily digestible chunks. Each chapter focuses on a different thing, and it incorporates self-compassion and mindfulness and forgiveness and being kind to yourself, which I think is really, really important. I hope you'll check out her book at Amazon.com. I know you can get it there, but she also said Barnes & Noble. And I hope you will join us next week on the podcast. Once again, thank you all, listeners and subscribers. If you have a moment and you have not subscribed or written a review for the podcast, I would totally appreciate it. Good for ratings. It's good for me. It's good for the podcast. It helps me reach more people. So that would be awesome. You can do that in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Ciao for now from this Woman Worrier.
Thanks for listening and subscribing to the Woman Worriers podcast. Music was written and performed by Andy Cush. If you'd like more information on this episode, you can find the show notes, the resources shared today, and links to the guests' profiles at womanworriers.com.